Good morning. This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. I'm Tom McKenzie in London. Happy Tuesday. These are the stories that set your agenda. Stocks in Asia hover near a record after fresh highs on Wall Street, powered by Nvidia's plan to invest $100 billion in OpenAI. Stocks in mainland China and Hong Kong retreat. Estonia says Russia is playing with fire by violating NATO airspace. The Polish Prime Minister says his country is prepared to shoot down foreign aircraft. Plus, Super Typhoon Ragasa barrels towards Hong Kong, threatening to be the most damaging cyclone since 2018. European futures bonding modestly higher, just by about 0.1% after a little bit of weakness yesterday, dragged lower by the auto sector. Looking again, it seems, for the next catalyst. Maybe that will come through from the data out of France, PMI data, 8:15 UK time, or possibly from Fed speakers, including Jay Powell, later today. FTSE 100 futures looking to add just 10 points so far as we position for the open at 8 a.m. S&P futures, again, after the 28th record of the year, currently pointing a little softer by 0.1%. This has been a $15 trillion rally that we've seen added in terms of market cap to US markets. And again, we look ahead to Fed speak today as well. 3 straight weeks of US equity gains. Nasdaq 100 futures looking at a softer by about 13 points, currently low by just shy of 0.1%. The Nvidia story and OpenAI. We will unpack that for you in detail in the next couple of minutes. Let's flip the board and look cross-asset. No treasuries trading right now because Japan is closed for a public holiday. So we look to the afternoon or later in the session for a gauge on treasuries. Right now, in terms of what's happening in the currency space, I was looking at Eurodollar. We'll look at Bitcoin as well because that felt a little bit of pressure across the crypto space yesterday. Crypto and Bitcoin right now at 112,000 on Bitcoin, just down 0.2%. Gold, a fresh record yesterday, above 3,700 for the yellow metal. Currently marginally softer, but still close to those record highs. ETF flows and expectations, of course, that there will be further rate cuts from the Fed, which will support the yellow metal, is the views from some. Positioning into gold. Brent at $66 a barrel, down 0.6% with a focus on supplies. Let's cross over to Asia right now, where the headline number is, yes, close to a record, but it's a little soggy in Hong Kong and mainland China. Asia equities reporter Winnie Su with the details. Winnie, what are you looking at?
Yeah, quite a muted session today. Obviously, we had a bit of an optimism translating from the Wall Street earlier today, but with Japanese markets closed and trading volumes remain quite thin, the Chinese market is actually under the spotlight here, and we're seeing a bit of a pullback. Yes, it was a big profit taking after a strong rally in the past few weeks, but also a little bit of a disappointment from yesterday's PBOC meeting. The central bank saying that they are in no rush to ease, even after the Fed has already cut rates last week. And take a look at the tech shares here, finally back in attention here with TSMC, Samsung, and SK Hynix up 2% or a bit, or even a little bit more, mostly driven by that AI optimism, right? We have Nvidia saying that they're going to pour $100 billion to OpenAI, and that has been really supporting also its supply chains across Asia. We also have Samsung benefiting from Goldman Sachs raising its price target, citing the structural demand tailwind. So all of this is still pointing to the fact that Nvidia remains that center of the AI ecosystem. You mentioned Typhoon just now. That's exactly what we are bracing for when it comes to the Hong Kong stock market and overall in Hong Kong. So right now we are looking at this biggest typhoon since 2018, and we are expecting it to be escalated to the T8 level in just a few hours. Potentially flights are cancelled, including mine going back to Hong Kong later today. And we have HKAEX saying that they are closely monitoring the situation. So we're going to see if they're all actually going to be able to keep markets open in the next few days. And also, it's just capping sentiment a little bit here because we might potentially see a delay in trading debut for Exein Gold, which is supposedly going to be the world's biggest IPO in a few months.
OK, Bloomberg Asia Equities reporter Winnie Su, thank you very much indeed on the impact that's already been felt by that typhoon, including, of course, Winnie's own flight cancelled from Singapore to Hong Kong. The disruption is already there as we look ahead to that potential landfall, of course, in Hong Kong and the potential damage to the city. And as Winnie was saying, Hong Kong markets, Hong Kong stocks softer in the session. To the Federal Reserve right now, the newest governor arguing that interest rates should be much lower to prevent damaging the economy. Stephen Miran was speaking in his first policy speech since being appointed by the US president.
Based on this analysis, I believe the appropriate Fed funds rate is in the mid 2% area, almost 2 percentage points lower than current policy. The Federal Reserve has been entrusted with the important goal of promoting price stability for the good of all American households and businesses, and I am committed to bringing inflation sustainably back to 2%. However, leaving policy restrictive by such a large degree brings significant risks for the Fed's employment mandate.
OK, let's get more from Bloomberg's Valerie Teitel. Val, I guess a question for many will be, is this a Stephen Miran, is this a Fed official who is simply echoing the sentiments of the president, or someone who is basing this on economic analysis?
Look, Tom, it was a bit of both in yesterday's speech. He did give quite an economic speech, had a decent table of data where he was pulling out that neutral rate of interest. But remember, Tom, we are paying a lot of attention to what Miran is saying because we still don't know who the next Fed chair is, and he potentially could be one of those candidates down the line. But in this speech, as you mentioned, he argued for the natural rate of interest to be way below where other members of the FOMC see it. He sees it in the near 2% range, and he saw that by calculating the Taylor rule of interest and subtracting the policies of the Trump administration that could potentially lower the natural rate of interest. One of his big ones was immigration, the lack of population growth dragging the neutral interest rate lower. He also mentioned trade and tax and deregulation policies dragging that neutral rate lower. And aside that, he said that in order to prevent damage to the labor market, we need to get to that neutral policy stance in a quick pace. And that was his argument for setting up the reason why he voted essentially for a consecutive 50 basis point cuts into the end of the year to get closer to that 2% policy range. But he did end his Q&A with something quite interesting, Tom. The moderator asked him if he was a fan of precise inflation targeting, if he was a fan of that 2% target. He responded that, look, I don't want to move the goalposts in the middle of the game, but when we do get back to 2%, I definitely am supportive of changing the Fed's inflation target away from being a precise 2% to something where it was pre-2012, which was just low and moderate inflation. So something to watch out for if Miran is selected as Fed chair and is head of these kind of policy changes in the years to come. But remember, we do actually hear from the exact Fed chair today. Fed Chair Powell is speaking around 5:30 London time later this evening. Now, we just heard from Powell last week, but remember, Tom, he was speaking from the perspective of the committee. Tonight, he speaks from a personal policy perspective from himself. Maybe a risk that he sounds a bit more dovish, given the dovish tilt of his Jackson Hole speech back in August. OK, Bowman, Bostic also up front today, and then Jay Powell, as you say, the big one later, which we, of course, continue to cover for you. Bloomberg's Valerie Teitel, thank you very much indeed for what we've been hearing as well from Stephen Miran and his views on the need for aggressively lower rates from the Fed. Now, Nvidia, and back to the tech story, of course, because shares got a boost after the company announced it's investing as much as $100 billion in OpenAI to support new data centers and other AI infrastructure. Let's unpack the deal and its implications for global markets with Bloomberg Asia AI reporter Sarita Rice. Sarita, what do we know then about this deal?
What we've learned so far, Tom, is that Nvidia will invest $100 billion in OpenAI over the course of some time. We don't know exactly how much. And this could also mean that Nvidia gets some equity in OpenAI. Now, that is as strategic as it comes. Getting an equity option into one of your largest global customers is really very, very strategic for Nvidia. Now, OpenAI is also equally dependent on NVIDIA's high-end, sophisticated GPUs for running its massive models. And the more sophisticated these models get, the more reliance it will have on NVIDIA. So I would see that it's a very, very mutually beneficial deal.
Okay, a mutually beneficial, arguably symbiotic relationship that we're starting to see between Nvidia and OpenAI. Sarita, give us the context. We're looking at a picture where Oracle has talked about a multiple $100 billion deal potentially with OpenAI for data centers. We've got the spending on Stargate domestically in the US on data centers, and then in Europe and the Middle East as well. There seems to be some of this is circular. The money, it seems. You've got Oracle, you've got the Nvidia's chips, you've got OpenAI. Where are we in this investment cycle?
Tom, earlier this year, the math was from the various company investor calls that the big tech giants in the U.S. will invest at least $200 billion this year in data centers and allied AI infrastructure. Now, that is massive, and also, raises fears of a giant bubble. But of course, there is no stopping the investors, because if there is one thing that AI relies on, it is these really sophisticated AI chips called accelerators, which help train these massive trillion-dollar data trillion parameter models. So the more sophisticated chips, the more better sophisticated complex models you will see. So OpenAI is actually talking about boosting its R&D with some of this investment. So you can be sure that the AI race is going to accelerate despite the fears of a bubble.
Okay, more to come, it seems. Bloomberg Asia AI reporter Sarita Rai, thank you for giving us the context around this Nvidia OpenAI announced deal. Now, to geopolitics, where Lithuania's president says Russia is testing NATO's readiness by repeatedly sending armed fighter jets into the airspace of its member countries. His comments come after 3 Russian fighter jets entered Estonian airspace last week. Estonia's foreign minister says Russian President Vladimir Putin is testing NATO's unity.
Putin is playing is a fire, and next time if we see the immediate threat to our territory or to us, it can be different. So Putin is trying to escalate and also trying to test our unity and capabilities, but he's failing normally.
Okay, let's bring in our Europe correspondent Oliver Kirk. Ollie, Estonian Foreign Minister Margus Tsahkna saying that another incursion to Estonian territory could be met with a different response. What is your understanding right now, Ollie, of how European leaders, members of NATO, are potentially looking to respond to any future incursions?
Well, listen, that's going to be the debate that's going to be held today, a little bit later, when you have the NATO sort of council meeting with all the ambassadors of NATO that was summoned by Estonia, triggering Article 4, which are these consultations by NATO. That's sort of the step, obviously, before Article 5, which would be a full invasion. Article 4 is concerned with sort of territorial infractions that threaten sovereignty in some way, and to have consultations among the member states. We should say this is the second time Article 4 has been triggered in the last 2 weeks, and it's only been triggered 9 times since 1949. So there's an acceleration of these kinds of incursions that is very worrying to the NATO allies. So they'll be discussing that a little bit later in Brussels, and we'll actually be speaking to the Estonian Prime Minister after all of those meetings to get his take on what the sort of correct response is. But after, just before we heard there from the Foreign Minister of Estonia, just before coming on Bloomberg, he was in front of the UN basically detailing the details of what this sort of incursion was on Friday. These 3 armed MiG fighter jets that he says were combat-ready planes that were in the airspace for 12 minutes. There had been 4 other violations earlier this year. The longest of those was 4 minutes long. This was 12 minutes long, and that went into Estonia more than 10 kilometers in and for 100 kilometers. So again, the NATO sort of allies need to, at this point, to evaluate kind of how to respond to this and to figure out what their own reaction function is in trying to set out where the red lines are. And of course, critical to that, Tom, is going to be the question of where Donald Trump stands on all of these. He's given sort of fragments of responses over the last few days. On Friday, when this first happened, he said he didn't love it. On Sunday, he said he didn't like it. And he was asked on Sunday whether or not he would come to the defense of Baltic nations and Poland, and he said he would do so. That being said, Tom, that is maybe coming to the defense on a full invasion. Is the United States willing to back these nations if they say shoot down a fighter jet that is over their airspace? That might be a very different story.
Yeah, and whether or not we now are on the brink of a more significant confrontation between Russia, of course, and NATO as leaders weigh up their options. Oliver Crook, thank you very much indeed. And Ollie will be speaking, as he mentioned, to the Estonian Prime Minister later. So a crucial conversation in the current environment. Stay with Bloomberg for that conversation. Here's what else to think about today then. Global flash PMI start with France at 8:15 a.m. UK time. We'll break those for you. At 3:30 p.m. UK time, President Trump will be speaking at the United Nations General Assembly in New York. We will bring that speech to you, of course. And at 5:30 p.m. UK time, we will hear from Fed Chair Jay Powell speaking on the economic outlook after, of course, the first cut of the year. And we'll bring that speech to you, of course. Anything he says, given the market pricing and the dot plots pricing in and looking at further 2 cuts by the end of this year. You can get a roundup of the stories you need to know to get your day going. In today's edition of Daybreak, terminal subscribers can go to DAYB Go on the terminal, unpacking there, as you can see, this deal between Nvidia and OpenAI and the implications, $100 billion. Coming up, Typhoon Ragasa heads to Hong Kong after battering the Philippines. More on what could be the most damaging typhoon to hit Hong Kong since 2018. Plus, later in the show, I'm going to be joined by the CEO of cybersecurity firm Exein for a timely conversation, given the recent spate of cyber attacks. Stay with us for that. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. Hong Kong facing potentially the most damaging cyclone since 2018. A super typhoon Ragasa tracks towards the financial hub after lashing the Philippines and Taiwan. Let's bring in our Asia transport correspondent, Danny Lee. Danny, preparations have already begun, it seems, in Hong Kong, where you join us.
Yeah, public transportation is being wound down from this afternoon. We've already had the airport, which is about to ground to a halt from 6 p.m. We do have flights already being cancelled en masse before then as well. We've got schools shut for 2 days, supermarkets since Monday night. Shelves were bare as long queues were forming because people are trying to prepare for this 2 or 3 day event and the widespread disruption this storm, this damaging storm, will cause. You know, we are seeing this storm is roughly about 400 kilometers or less away from Hong Kong at the moment, continuing to churn up winds of 220 kilometers an hour. That's still around a Category 4 hurricane, so it hasn't really weakened up until this point. And, you know, the view behind me, I'm sitting in the Grand Hyatt Hotel where I'm sheltering because I'm not sure how robust my apartment is from the tolerance of the winds. The skies are quite clear right now, but over the coming hours, we are going to see strengthening of the winds. We're going to see rain as well. So it is going to turn pretty drastic and quite ugly over the next 12 to 24 hours, and potentially, as you said, one of the most damaging storms since 2018.
Yeah, well, Danny, as you talk about your concerns about your own apartment in Hong Kong, what is the resilience of the city to events like this, and what is the kind of time frame that we expect in terms of things returning to normal for Hong Kong?
Hong Kong is, such an advanced modern city. The Asian financial hub. It's open to everybody, and so, over the many years, it has prepared for all kinds of events, really. And the fact that flooding in particular, there's always a lot of rain during the summer. Hong Kong has got the resilience to ensure that this city doesn't get flooded in ways after learning from previous events as well. So, this event, this typhoon, this damaging typhoon could last, 2 days or so. So the authorities are being very well prepared for what is to come. And so, the preparation and ahead of time, people are very much hunkered down, and the Asian financial hub may see a little bit of disruption, but just like Hong Kong and southern China, where 400,000 people have been evacuated from Guangdong and transportation has been suspended, people are very much prepared for the worst.
Wow, 400,000 people evacuated from Guangdong. Bloomberg's Asia Transport correspondent Danny Lee. Danny, thank you for the update. Stay safe. Coming up, France and Saudi Arabia joining the growing list of nations to recognise Palestinian statehood. We'll bring you the latest on that story next. From the region, this is Bloomberg. Welcome back to Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. Now, France has formally recognised Palestine as an independent state while calling for an immediate end to the war in Gaza. Worth clarifying that Saudi Arabia recognised Palestinian statehood more than 3 decades ago. Saudi Arabia is playing a role in convening members of the United Nations around this topic this week. Follows other action, of course, similar action, the French action, follows similar action by other countries, including the UK, Canada, Australia and Portugal in the last couple of days. Bloomberg's Gianni Pasecci is in Dubai. Gianni, what were the key takeaways then from the French President Macron's speech, particularly given the pressure, or at least the pushback that's come from Israel and the US?
Yeah, well, as you noted, this event that took place at the UN General Assembly was an event that was co-hosted by France and Saudi Arabia. And so President Macron took to the UN General Assembly. You can see the footage there. He gave this historic speech where he did recognize Palestinian statehood. And he also called on Israel to end the war in Gaza immediately, and then said, one solution exists to break the cycle of war and destruction. That is acknowledging each other. We must recognize that Palestinians and Israelis are living in, quote, twin solitudes. He also said that the French would be open to opening up an embassy for a Palestinian embassy once the hostages have been fully released by Hamas and the war is over. So signaling that perhaps they could even establish diplomatic relations of some sort once the war is over and the hostages have been released. Now, the Saudi foreign minister was there representing the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, echoing similar comments and calling for global recognition of Palestinian statehood, but also calling for an end of Israeli aggression, both in Gaza City, the ongoing offensive there, and on the West Bank as well. Now, this takes the total number of UN members that recognize Palestinian statehood to around 80%. 39 countries do not recognize Palestinian statehood, including, of course, Israel and the United States. Both of those countries have been very opposed to all of these unilateral declarations of statehood that have come through in the last couple of days. Now, the Israeli Prime Minister himself is set to give a speech to the UN General Assembly on Friday. He's meeting with President Trump on Monday, and he said that once he returns back to Israel, there will be a response to the nations that have announced the Palestinian statehood recognition over the last couple of days. Now, it isn't just about keeping the hopes and prospects of a two-state solution alive, which is what we've heard from many of these nations the last few days, but also they were incentivized to act because of the ongoing humanitarian crisis, the destruction that is taking place in Gaza. And the hope is that this could level or put some pressure on the Israeli government to perhaps cease with those offenses and with the attacks that are ongoing. But there seems no sign that this is going to be abating. If anything, the military actions in Gaza City have once again intensified, and there are growing calls from within the Israeli government to actually go one step further and go for a full annexation of the West Bank. That, for many countries, including the UAE, which is a signatory to the Abraham Accord, would be perceived to be a red line. So we will see what happens in the next couple of weeks. Critical timing.
OK, Horizons Middle East and Africa anchor Gianni Pasecci with that update. Gianni, thank you very much indeed. Coming up, we're going to look ahead to the PMI data out of France later this morning and discuss the prospects for a French budget, if we ever get one, with the ING's Charlotte de Montpellier. That is next. This is Bloomberg. Good morning. This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. I'm Tom McKenzie in London. These are the stories that set your agenda. Stocks in Asia hover near a record after fresh highs on Wall Street, powered by Nvidia's plan to invest $100 billion in OpenAI. Stocks in mainland China and Hong Kong retreat. Estonia says Russia is playing with fire by violating NATO airspace. The Polish Prime Minister says his country is prepared to shoot down foreign aircraft. Plus, Super Typhoon Ragasa barrels towards Hong Kong, threatening to be the most damaging cyclone to hit the city since 2018. Let's get to the markets right now, and risks around the typhoon are, as we're saying, dragging on Hong Kong and mainland shares, and we'll keep across that story for you, of course. European futures pointing higher by 0.2%, looking to pair the downside that came through yesterday. A little bit soggy, a little bit softer by the end of the close on Monday, dragged lower European equities by a drop in car maker stocks. Today, again, a slightly brighter picture after the 28th record gain for the S&P 500 this year. The FTSE 100 futures looking to add 12 points. S&P futures, after that fresh record high, currently unchanged. This has been a $15 trillion rally since those April lows. 3 straight weeks of gains for US equities. Nasdaq 100 futures largely unchanged. Let's flip the board and look across asset. You have no treasury trading, at least right now, because Japan is closed for a holiday. Euro dollar at 118. Bitcoin at 112,878 after a drop yesterday. Gold with ETF flows pushing to fresh record highs, currently at $3,752 per troy ounce, a further gain of 0.2%, and Brent under a bit of pressure, oil down 0.4%. Now to the macro, we're expecting French PMIs in just over an hour from now. Charlotte de Montpellier, ING senior economist, joins me for some analysis on the health of the French economy. Charlotte, thank you for your time. Are we expecting to see, given the political drama, the political uncertainty in France, is that likely to feed through to the economic data we're expecting later today?
Yeah, so the good news is that we got some sentiment data already last week, and they were quite okay, not that bad, so that's good news. That being said, PMI data tend to be usually a bit more pessimistic, and given the situation in France, the political situation, but also the budgetary situation, with a lot of talk about additional taxes, it's likely that we see a little bit of a decrease of the PMI data in France, but I wouldn't expect a big drop. I think it will be more of a gradual story in the month ahead.
Is this more of a manufacturing drag or a services drag? What do you expect in terms of the breakdown of those two components?
So probably that the service sector will be hit a bit harder. We know that the service sector is much more linked to the actually domestic economy, and currently the fact that there is no government but also no end in sight with the negotiation and the likelihood to find a budget is a bit waiting on the domestic sector. We can expect that companies, they become a bit more pessimist. They postpone some hiring plans but also some investment plans. So I would think that the service sector probably will be hit a little bit more, which is a worry, of course, because in the past few quarters, the service sector was a bit the engine of growth for the French economy.
Okay, so that's a concern. When it comes to the broader growth picture for France, then, what are your current projections? The Bank of France has growth of what, 0.9% next year? Does that align with your outlook for French growth?
Yeah, I think we can be even lower than that. I would forecast at this stage 0.8% for next year. This is quite low and much lower than the previous forecast from the government. So the government was expecting 1.2% GDP growth for next year. It means basically that the budgetary plans that were the beginning of the problems, I would say, so the fact that there are a lot of savings to be made in France, they are going to be even ever. So it will be even more difficult for the French economy to reach an increase or an improvement in the deficit to GDP ratio at this stage. Probably given the worsening economic outlook, we are going to see deficit to GDP ratio above 5% again next year. So that will be a concern for the public finance situation.
Okay, above 5% again next year for the deficit, 5.4% projection for 2025. What do we understand about the new Prime Minister, Monsieur Le Cornu's efforts at getting a budget together? Is this, how distant a prospect is it? Have we seen any signals that he is making progress?
At this stage, not really, because he's trying to negotiate, because the problem is that he does not have a majority in the parliament, so he needs to form some kind of agreement between different parties, and it's not happening right now. So there are a lot of talk, but nothing concrete, and all the talks are right now focused on an increased taxation for the wealthy people. So that's really the concern at this stage. We know that the budgetary situation is much worse and much broader than what one more taxation on the wealthiest people could solve. So I would say that probably it is a sign that the negotiations are only getting started and that there are no end or no, the finishing line is not in sight yet. I would think that probably we are still there for a few weeks, and then if there is an agreement, they still need to go to the parliament and not have a no confidence vote, which is again will be difficult to achieve. So quite a difficult situation, and I don't think we are going to see a budgetary plan anytime soon, to be honest.
Okay, no budgetary plan anytime soon. Charlotte, what would you look for in terms of a turning point that could move this from a fiscal crisis to an economic crisis for France?
Yeah, I think the issue right now is that the growth prospects are quite weak, to be sure. And if they are weak, it means that anything that happened around the world could be like some kind of negative shock, could lead actually to a sharp deterioration of if the French economy, when you have a situation where the sentiment is quite weak already, it means that, with a negative shock, you go real quick to a 0% growth rate or even a recession. So I would say that at this stage is not the best case scenario, but France is very, we will be very much impacted by any negative shock, and that's of course a big worry. Of course, the public finance situation at this stage is bad, but markets are not too worried about the thing. Of course, if it was getting seen as worst, that would also have an impact on the French economy, because we know that if markets start to get a bit more worried about the situation, then investment plans from companies will be even more costly. So it will have a negative impact, and I'm a bit afraid of us spiraling down. So to be honest, at this stage, it's not the case, but there are plenty of negative risk, and that's a bit the worry currently for the French economy.
Okay, Charlotte de Montpellier, fantastic insights in terms of the health of this French economy and the political risks that continue ahead of PMI data dropping 8:15 UK time. ING's senior economist, Charlotte, thank you. Switching focus right now, Disney says the US chat show host Jimmy Kimmel will go back on air today, nearly a week after he was suspended over remarks related to the murder of conservative activist Charlie Kirk. The company says it reached the decision after having what it called thoughtful conversations with the host. Let's get more from Bloomberg's Ros Matteson. Ros, well, that didn't take long. What do we know about this decision to put Jimmy Kimmel back on air?
Well, it's interesting to see he is coming back after about a week, because they were talking about an indefinite suspension, and Donald Trump and other US officials were talking about him being fired. As you say, there have been what ABC is calling thoughtful conversations with Jimmy Kimmel. What we know is he personally negotiated his return with the Disney CEO Bob Iger. The terms of that we don't know, but he will be reappearing and he will be addressing this issue when he does, because he normally does a monologue at the top of his show. So every word in that is going to be passed now to see what he says. Does he sound chastened? Does he come out swinging? Obviously, on the left and the right, dissecting that very carefully to see how he's responding in the minute. And particularly interesting to see what the FCC chair, the Republican Brendan Carr, has to say, because he was very critical in the minute of what Jimmy Kimmel said, and he was probably instrumental really in getting him pulled off the air. So what does he say in the aftermath? And then what does that mean more broadly not just for Jimmy Kimmel, but also for late-night show hosts as a whole. They tend to be critical of the government of the day. They tend to comment robustly on the politics of the day. Does he pull his punches going forward? And then what does that mean for his show?
Not only economic growth and the protests.
Yeah, well, indeed, watching to see whether these hosts end up, to some extent at least, self-censoring, given the change in mood in the US as a result of all this. Talk to us a little bit more then, Roz, about the broader significance, given concerns certainly amongst the critics of President Trump and his administration, that this is an administration that is attacking the media, that it has a war on the media, and that is leading to censorship.
Well, it's interesting seeing some of the behaviour of the TV networks and all of this, because they chose to pull the show off the air before Disney announced he would be taken off the air. And in fact, Sinclair, which is the largest owner, I think, of ABC TV stations, has said it's not going to show Kimmel's return today. It's going to have other programming going, so maybe waiting to see how he performs. But certainly you can see changes in behaviour in all of that. And an administration, as you say, who's quite interventionist. I mean, Donald Trump was asked about TV networks or personalities criticising him, and he said they're not allowed. And the concern, obviously, for these companies is that the FCC holds the keys to their licenses and also often has to sign off on deals like M&A that many of these companies are looking to do. So perhaps some changes in behaviour coming as part of that. And more broadly, as you were saying, Donald Trump personally suing different media organisations, the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times. Some organisations have chosen to settle in the past. Some are fighting these lawsuits, but a sitting US president taking active aim at media outfits in the US, and the question about where that leaves free speech, a real pillar of US society and free expression in the remainder of the Trump administration, and whether these lawsuits will continue.
Bloomberg's Roz Matheson, thank you very much indeed on that update regarding the Jimmy Kimmel Show and the broader implications, of course. Now to some of the stories making the news this Tuesday, and we're looking at the wind turbine maker Ørsted on Tradegate, called higher by more than 7%. This after the company says it will resume work on a wind farm off the coast of Rhode Island after a US court ruled that construction can continue, while the Danish company challenges a stop work order by the Trump administration. The judge agreed that the project, which is 80% complete, could suffer irreparable harm. The White House says the ruling will not be the final say on the matter, but that is a stock for you to watch at the open. Ørsted called higher on Tradegate by more than 7% right now. And Bloomberg understands that the Belgian lender KBC is evaluating a potential acquisition of state-backed Dutch rival ABN AMRO as it looks at ways to bolster its European footprint. Brussels-based KBC is in the early stages of studying the feasibility of a deal. ABN AMRO's shares surged while KBC's fell on the news. And the Resolution Foundation, an influential think tank, says UK Chancellor Rachel Reeves could raise £6 billion of income tax without hurting employees by aiming increases at pensioners, landlords and the self-employed. Ahead of the November the 26th budget, it is proposing to cut employee national insurance by 2 percentage points and raising the basic rate of income tax by the same amount. This recommendation is significant because former Resolution Foundation staff now hold senior positions at the Treasury. Coming up, I'm going to be joined by the CEO of Exein, which has completed the largest fundraise for a European cybersecurity firm so far this year. We'll discuss the recent spate of cyber attacks and why the CEO thinks Europe needs to reduce its reliance on cybersecurity made in the US. Stay with us for that conversation. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. Now, international air travel in Europe has recovered after delays caused by cyber attacks. The airlines are not alone. Major retailers and car maker Jaguar Land Rover has also had systems shut down by these attacks. And the fight back is attracting significant investor interests. IT security firm Exein announcing a €70 million Series C funding round in July, the largest raise for a European cybersecurity company this year. Gianni Cuozzo, Exein's founder and CEO, is here around the desk bright and early this morning. Gianni, thanks for joining us. We want to get onto the raise and what you guys are doing in terms of plugging some of these gaps. But let's start with the cybersecurity news and attacks that we've seen recently. We talk about Jaguar Land Rover, we talk about the airlines, we talk about retailers. Why does it seems from a non-expert perspective that we are more vulnerable than ever, and yet more money is flowing into cybersecurity firms? What is happening? Why cybersecurity firms are raising capital? There's a lot of different options out there, and yet it seems we're facing attacks almost on a daily basis.
So first of all, thank you for having me here. I think what's happened in the last days also shows the core vulnerability that cyber market right now has, which is centralization of infrastructure. For years, we've been invested in large centralized security infrastructure that actually holds our security in a single point of failure. And I think this is one of the biggest vulnerable failure that those approach to cybersecurity had. Right now, we are moving more on the decentralization security approach, but still a lot of infrastructure is still being centralized for years, which means that once you have a centralized infrastructure and you attack the single point of failure, then everything that is connected will fall behind.
Is it also a fact that because we're becoming more digitized across different industries and economies, we become more vulnerable? Or is it largely that, or is it the fact that we face more threats and more attacks?
I think it's both of this. Of course, technology is right now widespread than what's before, and we have more and more connected systems, connected devices that is ruling our industries or our life, even in our domestic houses. We have those IoT systems. But the reality is also that we are facing an increased cybersecurity activities, cyber attacks activities, and cyber warfare activities, and this is due to geopolitical tension, but also cyber activities. So it will be more and more, and the perimeter, so the number of those devices are getting huger and bigger, and that's why we will see more of both.
What are the gaps then when it comes to cybersecurity that you and Exein are filling?
We are, as Exein, we are exactly working on decentralizing security. So we are our approach is to bring cybersecurity countermeasure in each and own single devices that are part of a network. Right now, the approach is that you have a network, a secure network that actually put security on the devices that are operating in that network. In our approach is completely different because we decentralize security in every single device so that this device can help to secure the network in which they are operating. Right now, we are the largest embedded security company in the world. We're running 1.5 billion devices across multiple markets and multiple regions in that sense.
You're looking for acquisitions. You've got the capital now. What are you looking to add to the business?
We are going to add an acquisition very soon on the CPS platform, which means that we will extend our market from the manufacturers to the users in order to correlate the data that comes from the device to the people that actually use those devices, which is a really blind spot right now in the market because the two things are very separated. So we have the manufacturers and we are the operators. Our approach is to bridge the gap between the operators and the manufacturer with this acquisition.
Okay, so you'll be announcing that deal shortly, it seems.
Let's see.
Okay, so you're headquartered in Italy. What are the biggest markets for you regionally? Where you're looking to push?
Regionally, we are Asia-Pacific market. So we are based in Italy, but most of our revenues come from Asia-Pacific.
Okay, so Asia-Pacific, countries like South Korea, countries like Japan.
Taipei.
Okay, is the US a significant market for you?
Yeah, it's growing. It's growing in this moment.
And what kind of growth are you looking at right now? What is 2025? Give us some metrics in terms of the growth.
2025 to 2024 is a 450% year-on-year.
450% year-on-year. And you expect that level of growth to continue next year?
Yeah. We are also having already contracted revenues until 2032. So it's a very long-term contract, the visibility that we have right now.
Does AI enforce the good guys or give the bad guys more tools? Who wins on this?
I think both. But honestly speaking, I think bad guys will have more tool to their disposal than the good guys will.
Okay, well, that's concerning. But thank you for joining on the back of that raise and, of course, the acquisition story as well, and a broader take in terms of the cybersecurity risks that industries and individuals continue to face. Gianni Cuozzo, the Exein founder and CEO. Let's give you a headline breaking right now from ASM International, of course, the business based in the Netherlands within the chip space, cutting its second half view on softer than expected demand. So the red head there coming from ASM International, cutting its second half view on softer than expected demand. Interesting in light of what we've been seeing in terms of the data center commitments. ASML is in focus for us as well today. It's seen some upgrades, ASML. SM, though, seeing full year revenue growth forecasts of between 10 to 20% at the low end of the 10 to 20% guidance. A stock for you to watch this morning. There's a lot more coming up. Stay with us. This is Bloomberg.
I think that we should be very cautious in removing monetary policy restriction, because I think it's important that we stay restrictive to bring inflation back down to target. It worries me that if we remove that restriction from the economy, things could start overheating again.
Cleveland Fed President Beth Hammett. Well, are things overheating in the US equity markets? A 28th record high for the S&P 500 by the end of the close yesterday. 17% is the gains year to date. Just look at the work that's been done since April, of course. This is a $15 trillion rally that's come through for US stocks since, of course, the lows of April and the announcement of those tariffs by President Trump. What is going to get in the way of this rally? At some point, of course, this ends, but what will be the catalyst and when will that come? That is the picture across the US stock story. Fed cuts are certainly a part of that momentum, and that has affected gold, of course, as well. Record highs coming through for gold yesterday. Let's check in on the gold pricing. 3,700 or thereabouts. That's the record that broke through yesterday. A lot of that is down to expectations of an additional Fed cuts, of course, but also the ETF inflows. Linked, of course, those two stories. But you saw significant ETF inflows, and particularly pronounced on Friday, the highest in 3 years. So investors really getting exposed to the ETF story when it comes to gold, underpinning, of course, that gain. 3,700 and above right now for the yellow metal. Let's flip the board and have a look at one individual stock that's taken the crown of the most valuable publicly listed company in Europe. That's ASML. It's had its third upgrade from one of the brokers, Morgan Stanley, in just a month. They see very bright prospects, particularly in 2027 for the maker of these extreme ultraviolet lithography machines. So taking the crown from SAP and then LVMH as well. And you see the data center story around the spend coming through from OpenAI and Nvidia. Nvidia also investing in Intel. That's a major, of course, partner and client of ASML. So that's another positive for this business. Again, the upgrade coming through from Morgan Stanley, and we'll see how that stock reacts today on the latest news around the investment spend in the US. Now, Bruce Richards, the CEO of Marathon Asset Management, is coming up at 8:30 a.m. UK time, so stay tuned for that interview. And, of course, the Fed Chair, Jerome Powell, will speak at just after 5:30 p.m. this afternoon, UK time. We will bring you live coverage of the Fed Chair's speech on Bloomberg Television. And we're going to be speaking to the Latvian President and the Spanish Prime Minister at the United Nations General Assembly. The opening trade is up next. This is Bloomberg.